In today's video, I want to take a look at something that many people overlook when they create a simple form in HTML, and that is HTML input validation. Here I have a simple input that is supposed to be a username and just a submit button for the format hand. Okay, and I did turn off autocomplete just because it was giving me random autocomplete suggestions, but other than that, nothing too fancy, right? So right now, if we type anything in here, it is going to submit and refresh the page right now. And same thing is going to happen if I don't specify anything, right? So if I click here, it's going to, as you can see, reload the page. So nothing too fancy. Now everybody knows about the required attribute. So if I type in here required, well, and refresh the page, continue, yes, you're going to notice that if I hit submit without typing anything, it's going to give me an error. And this is not going to let you actually submit the form at the level of HTML, right? So whatever you do, even in JavaScript, it's not going to fire the onSubmit event handlers whenever you have this validation error. Okay, so this is like the most low-level validation you can do, and it is, if it fits your use case, it's actually one of the best. So here we just have the required attribute. It works as we expect, and if I type in something, it's going to refresh the page and work and send the information down the line. Okay. But there are a couple of things that you should be knowing about, and that is the min length and min or max length attributes. So here we can specify however many characters we want as a minimum in the input at hand. So here I can say min length 8. Let's say I want every username to be at least 8 characters long. Well, if I refresh and type in 8 characters, so let's say 8 characters. All right, that's more than 8, it's fine. But if I just hit 3 characters here, it's gonna give me an error, again, an HTML error. This error message is actually implemented by the browser at hand, so it's gonna be different for every single browser, but alas, you at least have some basic validation there. Similarly, the max length attribute exists, and let's specify here, let's say only 20. Now the interesting thing about the max length attribute is that it will not just give you an error message whenever you type in more than here 20 characters, it's going to actually prevent you from having 20 characters inside the input. So here I have 20 characters, and if I try to type in anything, it doesn't let me do that. And of course, when I submit, it's going to be valid because, well, I cannot type in any more than just that. Now, one more very interesting validation attribute is the pattern attribute. So if I type in here pattern, you can actually specify a regex that the input should match against before sending it to the onSubmit handler, right? So here, if I say, I don't know, let's say dot star, so that's going to match everything, and I want it to just end with a dash user here. For some reason, I want my users all to end with the string dash user. Why not? And if I try to paste in anything here, let's say anything, and say dash user, it is going to submit, all right. But if I type in anything without the dash user, it's going to give me an error saying that it doesn't match the requested format. Now, the issue here is that you're going to have to type in the requested format somewhere in the page so that the user actually knows what to type, because here it's like, okay, I don't know the actual pattern that I have to match against, and it's a problem, all right? So this is not, it doesn't give you the best error message, of course, but it is some validation that you can do as well, and it is much more in-depth because this supports a lot of things that you can validate at the HTML level. And the nice thing is you don't have to touch any JavaScript for validating this text input using regex, in this manner at least. Now, 2 more things that you can also use, but this only applies to numeric types, is the min and max attributes. So here I'm going to change the type of the input that we have here to a number, so that we have to specify a number here, and let's change the name as well because it doesn't mean anything here. So let's say just the ID. All right, I'm going to remove this pattern because it doesn't apply anymore, and if I refresh, I'm going to get actually a selector for the numbers here because the type has changed, and most browsers are going to implement this little thing here. Also, usually on mobile, it does show a different keypad, so instead of having all the letters, it does show automatically that you have just numbers that you can type in here, so that's pretty nice. And of course I cannot type in any letters, I can only type in numbers in this input. So this is another sort of validation, but only the type of the input. You have you're only able to type in numbers. Makes sense. Then of course you have the mean and max attribute, and these are kind of simple. You can specify here the mean to be, let's say, 0 and max to be, let's say, 10. Right, so you can only have a number from 0 to 10. And if I refresh this, I can just say here -4. And if I try to submit, of course I'm gonna get an error, or yeah, an error that says that the value must be greater than 0. So okay, I type in let's say 16, why not? And if I type in here, it's gonna say that the value must be less than or equal to 10. Okay, so the warning or the error messages that are being shown here are pretty self-explanatory. You don't really have to change anything here. So if I type in, of course, a number between 0 and 10, let's say 7, and I submit, that works. We don't get an error, so that's amazing. And of course, you can use the mean and max attributes on the range input type. So if I refresh here, I should get a range, and its values can only go from 0 to 10, and its step is probably 1. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that's at the middle. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we have only 10, but if I change it to, for example, 100, that should be way more steps, and we should see that, yeah, it is much more fluent, and we get any number from 0 to up to 100. And of course, we can change the minimum if you want. Let's say we change it to 90. So from 90 to 100, we're going to only have 10 steps, and that is indeed the case. Now, a few lesser known things about these mean and max attributes is that they can be used on date and time related input types. So here, if I have a time, an input type of time, then of course if I refresh the page, I'm going to get an actual time input. It is the default time input that is not probably the best implementation on the browser, and many people do actually like a custom one that works better. But if you really just need to input the time for something very basic, then this actually works nicely. So this works nicely. We can change the time. We can say, let's say 8:57 p.m. and if we submit, we don't get any warnings. That is because right now the mean and max attributes are not valid. So these mean and max attributes right now should represent a time value. And what we should tell it here is, for example, I can say that the minimum is midnight, right? And the maximum is, I don't know, let's say 6 a.m. Okay? And if I do such a thing, if I refresh this, you're gonna notice that if I select a time higher than this and try to submit it, it's gonna say that the value must be 6 a.m. or earlier, right? So it's gonna automatically validate the input form without you really needing to do any fancy things with JavaScript. And you can specify any interval here, of course. If I change this to, for example, 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., so in between those times, if I specify here, if I select 1 a.m. for whatever reason, where is it? 1 a.m. like that, and we submit, it's going to say that the value must be 2 a.m. or later. Okay, so you can work with that, and it's gonna be pretty nice. Okay, so you have a lot of customization options here. Now, of course, the autocomplete off here doesn't really make any sense, so I should remove it, and the name maybe should be something like, I don't know, time to meet, or something like that. Doesn't really matter in this context, as I'm not using this value. And if we change this to a date input type, the same thing you can do there, although we're gonna have to specify the min and max in the right format. So here right now it's not at all limited, so you can specify any date or time you want, but if I have it, for example, be limited to only dates that are from 2020 onwards, and let's say I don't have a maximum, if I refresh here, you're gonna notice that now I can no longer go up to 2019, let's say. And similarly, if I do the max, so that it's actually, let's say 2030, let's say 1231. Okay, if I refresh that, you're gonna notice that now I cannot go past 2030. Same thing for the date time input type. Now, one last type of validation that I think people shouldn't actually use is the email type input. So if I have here, I change this input to be of type email, and of course I change this so they are not required, and let's say just call it email, why not? And you'll notice that we actually get basically a text input, except it has a little bit of validation to it. So if I say here, let's say I say codevault@gmail.com and submit it, that works fine. But if I only say CodeVault and submit this, it's not going to work because it expects to be an @ character in the string. But this is really all the validation that it's doing, because if I type in @t and submit, it's going to allow me, even though t is not a valid domain, so it doesn't validate too much. So at that point, you're going to have to create your own, either a pattern that you should match against that should be added here, or validate it through JavaScript in some way. And possibly also validating the email address on the backend by sending a confirmation email, like most websites do nowadays. Now, all that being said, you should always implement the form validations both on your front end and on your backend, right? What I presented to you here is an alternative to JavaScript validation. So instead of actually typing a lot of JavaScript code to validate it on the front end, you can use some HTML attributes. But you shouldn't neglect the validation on the backend, because any user can change the HTML and then submit whatever they want afterwards. Similarly with JavaScript. It's a bit more obfuscated that way though. That's going to be it for today. I hope you got something out of this video. I hope you are going to try to use these HTML input validations more often than just simply validating it through JavaScript, if possible. And well, I'll see you guys next time. If you do have any questions, leave them in comments below or on our Discord server. Again, the source code for this video is going to be found on our website, link in the description below. Take care. Bye.